The galaxy had always known conflict, but nothing like this. Humanity's colonies, scattered across the stars, had lived in relative peace for decades, until the Zergari arrived. They came without warning, their ships resembling the twisted chitinous shells of insects, their weapons fueled by dark energy capable of shattering entire planets. The first major attack happened on the border of human space, where the Zergari overwhelmed the colony of HFY in less than a week. By the time the first distress signals reached Earth, it was already too late for Rethar. Captain Alina Trask stood aboard the Vanguard, humanity's last operational battleship, staring out into the cold, vast expanse of space. Her once strong hands gripped the cold metal railing on the observation deck, knuckles white. She had heard of the Zergari, but this was something different. The scale of their assault was beyond anything humanity had prepared for. They were more than just invaders, they were an unstoppable force of nature. "We're not going to make it," muttered Lieutenant Jonas Carter, her second in command, his voice filled with disbelief. He had been one of the first to suggest an evacuation of Earth, and his fears now felt justified as the data streams revealed incoming Zergari fleets in the hundreds. "We can't just give up," Elena said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Humanity's fought wars before. We'll adapt. We'll find a way to push back." But even as she spoke, doubt crept into her mind. What if this time, humanity wasn't enough? The first wave of the Zergari assault hit at a speed no one expected. On the screen in front of Elena, she saw the distorted, chaotic image of a Zergari flagship, a massive, spiked behemoth bearing down on a civilian freighter. The freighter's engines exploded in a flash of light, sending debris hurtling into the dark void of space. Her heart pounded in her chest as she gripped the armrests of her command chair. She knew this was just the beginning. "We need to defend Earth, or we'll lose everything," Elena said, more to herself than anyone else. "Prepare the fleet, full engagement." The Vanguard's engines roared to life, and the massive warship turned toward the coordinates of Earth. Her fleet, though outnumbered and outgunned, would make it stand. However, as the Vanguard sailed deeper into space, Elena's mind raced. The Zergari were like nothing humanity had faced before. These creatures didn't just conquer, they wiped their enemies from existence. There would be no surrender, no negotiations. The war would not be won by diplomacy. As the battle began in earnest, Elena commanded the Vanguard with a level of precision and ruthlessness born from years of training. Her crew moved in sync, but Elena could feel the tension. Every decision she made weighed heavily on her shoulders. Every order was a potential death sentence for the men and women under her command. The battle raged around them, explosions lighting up the darkness, and humanity's fate hanging by a thread. But Elena knew this. Humanity wasn't done yet. As long as they could fight, they would endure. The Zergari had underestimated one thing: humanity's ability to adapt and rise above every challenge. Elena's eyes narrowed as she prepared for the battle ahead. They weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for their future, and she would not let humanity fall without a fight. The Vanguard shuddered as another barrage of Zergari fire struck its shields. Elena's hands gripped the command console tightly, sweat beading on her brow. The ship's energy shield flickered, straining under the relentless assault. The Zergari had proven themselves more than just conquerors. They were tactical geniuses, relentlessly adapting to every strategy humanity threw at them. As the battle raged in space, Elena's mind was consumed by a single thought: how long could they hold out? The Vanguard's crew worked with military precision, each member performing their duties with unwavering dedication. But Elena could see the weariness in their faces. It had been hours of fighting, and they had barely made a dent in the Zergari forces. If Earth's defenses were failing, then what hope did they have? "Captain," Lieutenant Carter said, his voice crackling through the comm system, "we're down to 20% shield capacity. If they hit us again, we're done for." Elena's mind raced. They were dangerously close to Earth now, just days away from the Zergari flagship's estimated arrival. A full-scale invasion was imminent, and with each passing minute, Earth was more exposed. Humanity's homeworld, its last stronghold, would fall in a matter of days. A heavy weight settled on Alina's chest. She had to make a choice, and there was no time left for hesitation. "We need a new plan, Carter. Something they won't expect," she said, her voice steady despite the rising chaos. "Initiate an emergency warp jump. We're going to hit them where they're weakest, behind their lines." "Are you sure that's a good idea, Captain?" Carter asked, clearly concerned. "We're already pushing our systems to the limit. If we fail—" "We don't have a choice," Elena interrupted. "If we don't take the fight to them, there won't be anything left to save." As the Vanguard began to power its warp drives, Elena turned to her crew. "Prepare for a high-risk insertion. We'll be striking their command fleet. If we can cripple their coordination, we might just turn the tide. There's no room for error." The jump was rough. The Vanguard's engines groaned as it tore through space, slipping past Zergari patrols and deeper into the enemy's territory. The stars stretched into streaks of light, and Elena's stomach lurched with the sudden disorientation. It was a calculated gamble. If they succeeded, they could disrupt the Zergari's war efforts. But if they failed, the Vanguard would be stranded behind enemy lines with no escape. The moment the warp jump ended, Elena felt the shift in the air. They had arrived. "We're in position," Carter said, voice tense. "But the Zergari have already begun to retaliate. They know we're here." Before Elena could respond, the ship jolted violently. The Zergari flagship appeared in front of them like a massive, shadowed titan. Dozens of smaller ships swarmed around it, forming an impenetrable blockade. "All hands brace for impact," Elena ordered. The Vanguard fired its weapons at the closest enemy craft, but the Zergari were prepared. Their ships moved with unnatural precision, weaving through fire like a swarm of predatory insects. Elena could see the coordination between the Zergari forces, almost as if they were connected by some hive mind. "We need to hit their command vessel now, before they can react," Elena said, gritting her teeth. "All batteries, fire at will." The Vanguard's cannons roared, sending beams of concentrated energy into the heart of the enemy fleet. Explosions erupted around them, the sheer force of the assault shattering Zergari ships. But the flagship remained intact, its shields unfazed by the barrage. "This isn't working," Carter shouted, panic creeping into his voice. "We need something more." Then, just as hope seemed to slip away, a flicker of light appeared on the edge of the radar. A massive fleet of human reinforcements emerged from the dark void, led by the Redemption, another warship from Earth's defense fleet. "Hold on, Captain," Carter said with a mixture of disbelief and relief. "Reinforcements have arrived." The Zergari forces scrambled, caught off guard by the sudden appearance of humanity's remaining fleet. In the chaos, the Vanguard struck again, this time with more ferocity, aided by the support of their comrades. The tide was slowly turning, but Elena knew this was just the beginning. The reinforcements were enough to give them a fighting chance, but they weren't going to win the war with just a single battle. The Zergari would come again, stronger and more prepared. "We've bought ourselves some time," Elena said, her voice resolute. "But the war is far from over." She turned to face the vast expanse of space. Earth was still out there, its fate hanging in the balance. Humanity's last hope wasn't in any single battle. It was in the determination to keep fighting, no matter what. And as the Vanguard and its allies prepared for the next phase of the war, Elena knew one thing for sure: humanity would not fall without a fight. The Zergari were relentless. Each time humanity thought they had gained a small victory, the alien forces struck back with renewed fury, adapting their tactics and learning from every confrontation. Elena stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, eyes fixed on the star-streaked expanse ahead, but her mind was far from the battle at hand. Humanity's tenuous hold on its survival was slipping, and the political landscape back home was shifting in ways she had never anticipated. Alina had never trusted politics. In times of war, she preferred to rely on the clear, cold logic of strategy. But now, with Earth's government fractured and desperate, the lines between military and politics were becoming dangerously blurred. "Captain," Lieutenant Carter's voice broke through her thoughts. "You need to see this." The transmission was from Earth's High Command, relayed through a secure channel. Alina's face hardened as she read the message. It wasn't a request, it was an order, one that chilled her to the core. "Command has ordered us to immediately halt our offensive against the Zergari flagship and return to Earth. They want to begin negotiating a ceasefire with the Zergari leadership." Alina's fingers curled into fists. A ceasefire? With the creatures who had already wiped out entire colonies, destroyed Earth's defenses, and were now marching toward the heart of humanity's last strongholds, the very idea seemed absurd. "I refuse," Alina said sharply, her voice carrying the weight of years of training and sacrifice. "We can't trust them. The Zergari won't stop until we're all dead. If we give them a foothold, Earth will fall." Carter nodded, sharing her frustration. "You know what this means, Captain. If we disobey, High Command will call it insubordination," Alina finished for him. "And if we obey, humanity might not have a future to fight for." Alina's thoughts raced as the reality of the situation set in. She had seen this before, politicians making decisions from a place of fear, not strategy. They were negotiating not from strength, but from desperation. Alina could already see the words on the screen: peace at any cost. She had seen such compromises before during the earlier days of the war. Peace would not come from weakness, it would come from the will to fight. "Prepare the fleet for a tactical withdrawal," Alina said, her voice icy with resolve. "We'll make a stand and buy time for Earth's remaining forces to regroup. But we're not abandoning this fight." Carter stared at her for a long moment before giving a curt nod. "Understood." Alina turned away from the communications console and faced the view screen again. The Zergari were still out there, relentless in their pursuit of humanity's extinction. But now, the true enemy was closer to home. Hours passed in tense silence as the vanguard prepared to move. Alina had already ordered her officers to quietly make preparations for the worst. While her crew was loyal, Alina knew that disobedience could cost them their lives. The decision to disobey High Command had consequences, ones she didn't fully understand yet. But she had no choice. A ceasefire now would be the death sentence for humanity, and Alina couldn't allow that. Her mind kept coming back to one thing: Marcus Hale, the ambitious general who had been growing more powerful within Earth's High Command. Alina had served with him in the past. Once, they had fought side by side against pirates and other threats, but Marcus had always been more pragmatic, more willing to make peace with the enemy if it meant keeping his power intact. His rise to power, and his vocal support for negotiating with the Zergari, made Alina uneasy. Was he the one pushing for peace, or was there something darker at play? "I don't trust Marcus," Alina muttered to herself. But it wasn't just Marcus who worried her, it was the shifting balance of power within humanity itself. The once united war effort was fracturing under the strain. Some commanders and officials saw a ceasefire as the only way to preserve what was left of humanity. They didn't understand that by giving in to the Zergari now, they risked everything. Alina's heart hardened. The time for diplomacy had passed. The time for humanity to fight for its survival was now. But it wouldn't be easy. The war was no longer just against the Zergari. It was against their own leaders, their own fears, and a fractured humanity that might just collapse under the weight of its own desperation. The Vanguard's engines hummed as it powered up, preparing for its next move. Alina knew this would be a dangerous gambit, but it was their only option. There was no turning back now. She would fight, not just for Earth, but for the future of humanity itself. As the Vanguard left orbit, Alina felt a sense of finality. Betrayal was in the air, and every decision she made from here on would carry the weight of not just her crew's lives, but the fate of the galaxy. The Vanguard moved swiftly through the cold vacuum of space, but Elena felt the weight of 1,000 decisions pressing down on her. Every course change, every order, now seemed to have far-reaching consequences. While the ship's crew remained focused on their duties, Elena knew the true battle was not just against the Zerguri, but against a divided humanity splintered by politics and fear. The orders from High Command were clear. The ceasefire was non-negotiable. If Elena refused to comply, she could be branded a traitor. The thought stung, but she steeled herself. She had to act. Humanity's survival depended on it. She glanced out at the stars once more, her reflection ghostly in the window. Her crew, her family, were depending on her to lead them through this storm. "Captain," Carter said, his voice tight with concern. "We've received a new transmission from Earth. It's from General Hale." Elena stiffened. Of course, it was Marcus Hale, the man who had steadily risen through the ranks while humanity was dying. His message flickered onto the holoscreen, his face hard and unyielding. "Captain Trask, I know you're listening. I've heard of your insubordination, and I won't tolerate it. You are to cease all operations against the Zerguri immediately and return to Earth, or you will face the consequences. We will not allow rogue elements to jeopardize humanity's fragile peace efforts." Elena's hands clenched into fists, the words stoking a fire of defiance within her. Marcus was playing a dangerous game, one that could cost them everything. What he failed to understand was that there could be no peace with the Zerguri, no negotiation. These invaders did not respect treaties or diplomacy. They only respected power. "Cut the transmission," Elena ordered, her voice cold and controlled. She turned to Carter, her face hardening. "The ceasefire will be their death sentence. He's playing into their hands." "We've already seen what they're capable of, Captain," Carter said quietly. "Maybe Hale is right. Maybe we don't have the strength to fight them head-on." Elena's gaze snapped to Carter, a cold fury in her eyes. "We have the strength, Carter. What we lack is the will to use it." Her words echoed in the quiet room, and for a moment, the entire bridge seemed to hold its breath. There was a long pause before Carter spoke again, his tone hesitant. "And if Hale is right, what if we're the ones making the wrong choice?" Elena felt a pang of uncertainty. What if Hale wasn't just a political figure, but someone who truly believed a ceasefire could save humanity? Could the military be wrong? Could she be wrong? The weight of leadership had never felt heavier. "Either way, we make our stand here," Elena said, her voice firm, if not slightly uncertain. "The Vanguard is our last hope. We cannot trust them to do what's right. If it means defying orders, then so be it." Carter nodded reluctantly, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. The crew was loyal, but loyalty could only go so far when survival was on the line. He wasn't alone in his doubt. There were whispers among the crew, subtle signs of unease. Discontent was spreading, and Elena knew it was only a matter of time before the cracks began to show. The sound of footsteps interrupted the silence. Commander Riatran, the Vanguard's chief strategist, entered the bridge, her face pale with worry. "Captain," she said urgently, "we've intercepted more Zerguri fleet movements. They're amassing in a formation. They're preparing to strike at Earth, and they're sending out scouts. They know we're here." Elena's pulse quickened. The Zerguri were intelligent, methodical. Their tactics were ruthless, and they wouldn't stop until Earth was no more. Their forces were organizing. A full-scale invasion was imminent. The countdown had begun. "We need to make our move," Elena said, slamming her fist on the console. "If we wait any longer, we'll be outnumbered. Prepare the fleet for combat. All ships are to form up for a direct assault on their command fleet. We're not retreating." Ria's eyes widened. "A direct assault, Captain? With the reinforcements arriving at Earth, if we attack now, we risk cutting off their escape routes and putting Earth in even more danger." Elena shot her a sharp look. We're already putting Earth in danger. The Zergari won't wait for reinforcements. They'll hit Earth hard and fast. We have to take the fight to them. Now." Rhea hesitated, but then nodded. "Understood, Captain. I'll prepare our tactics." As the crew sprang into action, Alina allowed herself a brief moment to close her eyes. She had no illusions about the risks they were about to take. This could very well be their final stand. But one thing was clear: humanity's fight wasn't just for survival, it was a fight for its soul. A fight to prove that it was more than a fleeting species to be wiped out by a stronger, more ruthless foe. Alina had chosen her path. Now there was no turning back. The Vanguard cut through the dark expanse of space, its engines roaring with an intensity born of desperation. Alina stood at the helm, her eyes fixed on the view screen as Zergari ships began to assemble in the distance. It was an armada, vast and unrelenting. Every moment of hesitation was a death sentence. As the ship's systems hummed and beacons flashed in a synchronized rhythm, the tension was palpable. "Captain, we're at the edge of their perimeter," Rhea reported, her voice steady despite the mounting threat. "The Zergari fleet is closing in, but they're not engaging just yet. They're waiting for something." "Waiting for us to make a mistake," Elena muttered under her breath. She couldn't help but feel the oppressive weight of their odds. Humanity's fleet was small compared to the Zergari juggernaut, and there was no room for error. They had one chance, and if they didn't make it count, Earth would fall. "All ships are in position, Captain," Carter said, his voice unwavering but edged with the stress of the situation. "We're ready to launch." Elena took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Initiate the attack. Full barrage on their command flagship. All ships, focus fire. No distractions." The Vanguard's weapon systems came to life, unleashing a barrage of energy beams and plasma rounds at the Zergari flagship. The strike was precise, cutting through the darkness like a violent pulse, sending shockwaves across the Zergari formation. For a moment, it seemed like they might have the upper hand. The flagship staggered as its shields buckled under the assault. But just as quickly as the hope surged, the Zergari responded with brutal efficiency. Their ships retaliated, sending a swarm of projectiles and beams in every direction. Elena's hands tightened on the control panel as the Vanguard rocked violently under the incoming fire. "Shields at 40% and dropping," Carter shouted. "We can't keep taking this kind of damage." The bridge crew scrambled to keep the ship intact, but Elena knew they couldn't withstand a prolonged engagement. They had to cripple the Zergari leadership now, before their own ships were destroyed. "Deploy the boarding teams," Elena ordered with a calmness that belied the chaos. "We're going to board the flagship. If we can take out their command center, we can cripple their coordination and throw them into disarray." The crew responded instantly, preparing the small teams of elite soldiers and engineers who would infiltrate the enemy ship. The risks were enormous. Boarding a Zergari vessel was a suicide mission. But Elena had no other choice. If humanity was to have any hope of surviving, they needed to strike decisively, and they needed to do it now. "All units, prepare for deployment." Rhea barked, her voice sharp as she coordinated the attack. "Boarding teams are on standby." The Vanguard broke through the Zergari defenses with a speed that defied their numbers. Missiles streaked past them, but the ship's agility, combined with precise evasive maneuvers, kept them from taking fatal hits. Elena's heart raced as the battle unfolded before her eyes. The ships around them exploded in bursts of fiery light, and the chaos of war raged on in the space between. Elena knew the boarding operation was a long shot, but if they succeeded, they could cripple the heart of the Zergari command. Without their leaders, the fleet would lose its cohesion, giving humanity a fighting chance. Every second counted. The boarding pods were launched, streaking toward the Zergari flagship, and Elena watched as they flew into the maw of the enemy's ship. But even as they deployed, she knew the battle wasn't just about technology or tactics. It was about humanity's unyielding will to survive, to keep pushing forward against impossible odds. On the Vanguard, every soldier and officer knew that this was their last stand. The future of humanity depended on their success or failure. Elena's thoughts turned to Earth, the home they were fighting to protect. It was no longer just a planet. It was the very symbol of humanity's defiance against the universe's indifference. "Captain, boarding teams are reporting in," Rhea said. "They've made it inside the flagship. The command center is ahead, but the Zergari are already preparing a counterattack." "Hold the line," Elena ordered, her voice tight with determination. "We'll keep them off balance while the teams make their move." The next few moments were a blur. Explosions rocked the ship, alarms blared, and the Vanguard shook violently as the Zergari retaliated. But there was no turning back. Elena's eyes narrowed with resolve. They would break the Zergari today, no matter the cost. As the last of the boarding pods slammed into the flagship's hull, Elena's pulse quickened. The tide of battle was about to turn, one way or another. The Vanguard trembled under another series of direct hits, but Elena's focus never wavered. She could feel the battle raging outside, the weight of humanity's fate pressing on her shoulders. Her crew, her family, were depending on her to lead them through this last gamble. And yet, the true battle wasn't being fought in space. It was happening aboard the Zergari flagship, where humanity's elite boarding teams had made their desperate push. "Captain, we've lost communication with the boarding parties," Rhea reported, her voice tight with stress. "The Zergari are scrambling to contain them. We've detected heavy resistance at the flagship's command center. It's unclear how much longer they can hold out." Elena's grip on the arm of her chair tightened, her knuckles white. The teams had already endured impossible odds, and now it seemed as though the final push might fail. But failure was not an option, not with Earth's survival on the line. She could almost hear the Zergari commanders barking orders, organizing countermeasures in their insectile tongues. "Do we have any updates from our forces?" Elena asked, her voice steady despite the tension flooding her body. Carter's face appeared on the tactical display, his expression grim. "We're holding the line, Captain. The Vanguard has taken considerable damage, but we've dealt some significant blows. However, the Zergari forces are adapting faster than we expected. If we don't succeed with the boarding teams, the rest of our fleet won't last long." Elena nodded grimly. Their window was rapidly closing, and the battle would soon be lost unless the ground teams succeeded in neutralizing the Zergari leadership. Time was a luxury they didn't have. The status of the boarding mission was clear in the flashing tactical readouts. 3 boarding teams were engaged in bitter combat, deep within the bowels of the enemy ship. Elena didn't need the numbers to know what that meant. The teams had already suffered casualties, and while their mission was simple, disable the Zergari command center, the odds of success were shrinking by the minute. "I need a direct line to our teams," Elena said, turning to Rhea. "Can you establish communications?" Rhea hesitated for a moment before nodding. "I'll try, Captain, but the Zergari are jamming everything." Elena's fingers drummed restlessly against the console as Rhea worked to re-establish the connection. It felt like hours before the comms line crackled to life. A distorted voice, barely audible, broke through the static. "Captain, this is Team Omega. We're inside the command center, but they know we're here. We've lost half our squad, and we're pinned down. We need extraction, or we won't make it out alive." The voice faltered, and Elena could hear the heavy breathing and the distant sounds of gunfire in the background. She could feel her heart hammering in her chest. "No," she whispered to herself, barely audible. They had come too far to fail now. There was no time for a retreat, no time for second chances. Elena made a split-second decision, one that could cost them everything. "Team Omega, hold your position," Elena said firmly, her voice sharp and clear. "We're coming for you. The Vanguard will engage their fleet and provide cover. You push forward, and we'll get you out. This ends now." There was a brief silence on the line, as if the team on the other end wasn't sure whether to believe her. Then the voice crackled back, hoarse with determination. "You heard her, Omega. We push to the heart of their command, or we die trying. We'll hold." Alina's eyes narrowed. They were right. There was no turning back. If Team Omega could hold the command center just a little longer, she might have a chance to end this. "Prepare all fighters for a full assault," Alina ordered, standing up, her face steely with resolve. "We will create a diversion. Every ship in the fleet will concentrate fire on the Zergari flagship's external weapons. They'll need to turn their attention to us if we're going to give Omega the time they need." Carter looked at her, eyes wide with concern. "Captain, if we divert all firepower, we risk leaving ourselves open to a counterattack." "We risk everything if we don't," Alina replied, voice unwavering. "This battle is bigger than one ship. It's bigger than any of us. We're going to finish what we started." The order was given, and the fleet moved into position. Every fighter, every gun, every weapon aboard the remaining ships focused on the Zergari flagship. The sky lit up with energy blasts, ships swirling in the chaos of battle as the vanguard led the charge. Meanwhile, inside the Zergari flagship, the remaining human teams were running out of time. Team Omega pushed forward, their bodies battered and covered in the signs of relentless combat. But their resolve was unshaken. They had one mission: to cripple the Zergari leadership, and if they succeeded, it would mean victory for humanity. As Alina looked out at the raging battle unfolding before her, she knew the fate of humanity rested on those few brave souls. And if they failed, there would be no more fights, no more hope. The last remnants of human defiance would crumble under the weight of the Zergari's merciless conquest. But Alina refused to entertain that thought. She couldn't. Not yet. The stars around the vanguard exploded into bursts of light as their weapons collided with the Zergari flagship's shields, sending violent shockwaves rippling through space. The vanguard's hull groaned as it absorbed yet another barrage, but Alina's focus was unshakable. They were making progress, just enough to keep the Zergari distracted while Team Omega pushed deeper into the heart of the enemy ship. The Zergari fleet was slowly becoming disorganized, their attempts at coordinated counterattacks faltering. "Captain," Rhea said, her voice tense, "Zergari forces are beginning to redirect their fire to us. They've adapted to our tactics." Alina's fingers curled into fists, but she didn't flinch. "Keep the pressure on. I want every ship locked onto that flagship. We're not giving them a chance to regroup." The battle outside the ship was a swirling vortex of chaos. Zergari ships were breaking formation, trying to fend off the relentless assault from the human fleet. Alina could see it on the tactical display, their shield grids faltering, their fleet's movements becoming erratic as they tried to deal with the unyielding firestorm. Humanity's fleet, though outnumbered, had taken the fight to the enemy's doorstep, showing no sign of retreat. But the real war was taking place inside the Zergari flagship. Alina's breath hitched as she focused on the live feed from the Vanguard sensors. A small tactical map of the flagship flickered in front of her, showing the positions of Team Omega and their progress through the Zergari labyrinth. They were deep inside, but time was running out. Their mission was clear: disable the Zergari command hub and destroy their ability to coordinate a defense. If they succeeded, the Zergari fleet would be blind, unable to react to the chaos unfolding outside. But the Zergari were not blind for long. "We're encountering heavy resistance," Team Omega's lead, Surgeon Holt, reported over the comms. His voice was ragged, but determined. "We've lost most of our heavy infantry. The command center is ahead, but we're being cornered. We can't hold much longer. You need to give us more time, Captain." Alina's heart pounded in her chest. Her mind raced. There was no time for second chances. Team Omega had fought through hell to get to the command center, but they were fighting against more than just the Zergari. They were fighting against the very limits of human endurance. Every second that passed, They were one step closer to being overwhelmed. "Hold your ground, Omega," Elena barked, her voice carrying across the comms. "We're not abandoning you." The decision was made. Elena slammed her fist onto the console. "Carter, Rhea, prepare to breach the flagship's outer hull. I'll be leading the boarding team myself. We're going in." The bridge fell silent for a moment. Carter, Rhea, and the rest of the crew turned to her in stunned disbelief. But Elena didn't hesitate. They needed to finish this, and if Team Omega was going to make it out alive, they needed every hand on deck. "Captain, you can't," Carter began, his voice full of concern. "Orders are orders, Commander," Elena replied, her voice cold with finality. "I won't leave them behind. We do this now or we lose everything." Without waiting for further argument, she turned toward the exit, her every movement fueled by the sense of inevitability. This was her battle, her responsibility. The lives of her crew and the fate of humanity rested on the next few moments. On board the Zergari flagship, Team Omega was entrenched in the heart of enemy territory. The corridors were filled with the sound of gunfire and the oppressive hum of alien technology. The Zergari forces were relentless, their numbers overwhelming. But despite the casualties mounting on both sides, Omega pressed forward, inch by bloody inch. Sergeant Holt gritted his teeth as he crouched behind a wall, firing rounds into the Zergari warriors advancing on their position. His team had already lost nearly half its soldiers, but they weren't giving up. The command center was within reach. The Zergari had no idea what was about to hit them. "We've made it," Holt grunted, signaling to his team. "Get ready to breach. On my mark." The final moments were chaos incarnate. The door to the command center exploded outward with a violent flash, the Zergari within unprepared for the assault. Omega stormed in, their weapons blazing as they cleared the area. Holt's breath was heavy, his vision blurred with adrenaline and smoke. He turned to his team, issuing rapid commands as they fanned out. The heart of the enemy's operation was ahead, just beyond the reinforced doors. And then, just as the team prepared for the final push, an explosion rocked the command center. The Zergari had planted a trap. Omega's soldiers were thrown back, the explosion knocking several of them to the ground. Holt gritted his teeth, struggling to keep his bearings. His vision blurred as his suit's internal diagnostics flashed warnings, but he refused to go down. Not now, not when they were this close. "Sergeant," one of his men shouted, pointing to the center of the room. There, hidden behind a massive control terminal, was the Zergari commander, a monstrous creature covered in battle scars, furiously trying to reroute their systems. "Elena," Holt whispered under his breath, "we have one shot." The team regrouped, pushing forward with the last ounce of their strength. The battle inside the flagship had come to this. One final confrontation with the leader of the Zergari. Holt's hand tightened around his weapon. The fate of the war, of humanity itself, rested on what happened in the next few minutes. And Elena's arrival could be their salvation or their doom. The Vanguard's engines rumbled as Elena sprinted down the narrow passageways, flanked by her most trusted officers. The air was thick with the smell of burning metal and ionized air, echoes of the battle that raged just outside. Every moment, every step, felt like a lifetime as the countdown to humanity's future ticked away. Elena's heart raced in time with her footsteps. She had issued the order to breach the flagship's hull. The Vanguard's boarding pods were deployed, making their way toward the heart of the Zergari ship. But time was quickly running out. Omega's signal had weakened, and she couldn't afford to wait any longer. She had to be there, at the command center, where the fate of the entire war would be decided. Her mind was a blur of strategy, memory, and instinct. Omega was already inside, but the last communication had been grim. The team had encountered heavy resistance, and now the only way to stop the Zergari from regaining control of the flagship was to strike decisively, neutralizing their command structure. Elena arrived at the docking bay just as the Vanguard's last boarding pods hit the Zergari hull with a deafening impact. She donned her helmet and checked her weapon systems. They would need precision, every shot counted, and failure wasn't an option. The moment she stepped onto the pod, she gave one last glance to her crew. "Give it everything we've got. This ends now." Elena's voice was cold with resolve, yet filled with the weight of sacrifice. Her crew nodded, steeling themselves for what they would face. They were fighting for more than survival. They were fighting for the future of humanity itself. The boarding pod shot through the flagship's hull and rocketed into the heart of the Zergari war machine, the walls flashing by as they cut through alien corridors. A chorus of grating sounds filled the pod as the hull vibrated, but Elena kept her focus on the mission ahead. The pod landed with a thud, its doors bursting open as Elena and her team spilled into the darkened corridor. It was eerily quiet, too quiet. They moved swiftly, weapons raised, every step deliberate as they pushed toward the command center. On the other side of the ship, inside the enemy command center, Team Omega was holding their ground. Surgeon Holt was still alive, his squad battered but unbroken. They had fought their way through the Zergari defenses, inch by bloody inch, but the door to the control room was locked, and their enemies were closing in. Holt looked at his team, his face drawn with exhaustion. "We're not stopping now. We're breaking through. For Earth, for humanity." He and the remaining soldiers pushed forward, setting explosives on the heavy door. They needed only a few more seconds. The blast echoed through the halls, and the door to the command center buckled under the pressure. Holt's squad stormed in, guns blazing. The Zergari commander, a hulking, armored beast, turned in shock, his multiple eyes flashing with rage as he saw the human invaders. But there was no fear in Holt's eyes. His mission was clear. He would end this fight here and now. "Captain," Holt muttered into his comms, "we've reached the command center, but we've got company. It's a bloodbath in here." "I'm on my way," Elena replied, her voice firm. The tension in the command center was palpable. The Zergari leader roared and lunged at the human soldiers, his body a whirlwind of claws and fangs. He moved faster than expected, his agility defying his size. But Holt and his team stood firm, their weapons blazing as they forced the creature back. The Zergari leader's roars reverberated through the ship, rattling the air. Outside the command center, Elena's pod finally reached the docking bay, and her team swiftly entered. They encountered little resistance. Most of the Zergari forces had been stretched thin by the ongoing battle. She could feel the adrenaline pumping through her veins, driving her forward. "Elena, you're close." Carter's voice crackled through the comms. "Team Omega is holding, but they're barely hanging on." "Understood," Elena replied, her breath coming faster. "We finish this now." As she rounded the final corner, the command center came into view. Elena's eyes locked onto Holt, his squad scattered across the room, exchanging fire with the Zergari commander. Her heart skipped a beat. This was it. Without hesitation, Elena raised her rifle and fired, taking down the nearest Zergari soldiers with surgical precision. The blast doors to the command center were open. She rushed forward, her team right behind her. The battle inside was a blur of motion, her soldiers moving as a cohesive unit, working with fluid precision. Elena's eyes never left the Zergari commander, who was now facing two human teams, both bent on his destruction. The Zergari roared and charged, but Elena was faster. She dove, using the wreckage to her advantage, and aimed at the commander's exposed weak points. A precise shot to his head sent the alien leader crashing to the floor, lifeless. "Commander down," Elena shouted over the comms. The room fell silent. The Zergari forces stopped, their movements stuttering, as though the pulse of the flagship had suddenly faltered. The ship's control center was in chaos, and the remaining Zergari soldiers hesitated, disoriented. Elena turned to Holt, her breath ragged. "It's over. The command structure is broken." Holt nodded, a grim smile crossing his face. "We did it," humanity's still standing. But Elena knew better than to celebrate too soon. They had won a critical battle, but the war was far from over. There would be more challenges, more fights to come. But for now, humanity had shown the universe what they were capable of, a resolve, an unbreakable will to survive. And with the death of the Zergari commander, humanity's future, for the first time in years, was secure.